Daniel Carter never thought his life would take him far from the shipyards. He had grown up fixing engines, patching up broken panels, and finding clever ways to keep machines running even when the parts were missing. To him, that was life. It was not glorious, not heroic, but it was steady. He never dreamed that his hands, scarred from tools in Greece, would ever place him in the grand hall of the Zayari Empire. Yet there he stood, surrounded by towering warriors from across the stars with eyes of disbelief staring at him. The hall itself was vast, carved from crystal that glowed with the light of twin suns. Stained windows painted the floor in shifting colors, and high above, banners of alien houses swayed in an unseen breeze. It was here that Princess Lysera was to perform her rite. Every generation, she would lay her hand upon the chest of warriors who came forward, searching their very essence for the traits of strength. Not the strength of muscle alone, but the deeper code written in the fibers of life. It was said her family could sense the very spirit that burned inside a being. Today she had tested them all. Reptilian fighters with scales hard as steel, insectoid gladiators with claws sharper than blades, and even energy beings that pulsed with living fire. All had failed. The crowd murmured, restless, as another warrior stepped back defeated. The princess lowered her eyes in disappointment. Her people were at the edge of war, the swarm of the Zeeth Dominion drawing ever closer. If no champion was found, the future of the empire would be uncertain. The counselors whispered among themselves, some already despairing. At the edge of the chamber, Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He had not come for this. He had been sent to repair the docking systems that had broken during the arrival of the warriors. His name had not even been on the list. He was no fighter. He was just a mechanic from Earth, a human world considered unremarkable by most galactic records. But somehow, through the laughter of the guards and the mockery of the nobles, his name had been called. "Bring him forward," the princess had said. Her voice was calm but firm, her eyes steady. Some tried to argue, but the rite allowed her to test whomever she wished. And so Daniel found himself walking across polished floors, his boots heavy, his heart pounding like a drum. Every eye followed him. Some held laughter, others held anger, but all were fixed on him. He stopped before the throne. Princess Lysera stood tall, her silver hair flowing down her shoulders, her eyes glowing faintly with the ancient gift of her bloodline. She looked at him not with scorn but with curiosity. "Place your hand on your heart," she told him softly. Daniel obeyed, lifting his rough hand to his chest. He felt foolish. His palms were calloused, his fingers marked by years of work, and he thought of how they must look compared to the proud and gleaming forms of warriors before him. He braced himself for laughter, for rejection, for the princess to pull her hand away as she had with all the others. But when her fingers touched him, everything changed. A warmth spread through him unlike anything he had felt before. Her eyes widened, glowing brighter, and the chamber fell into silence. She drew in a sharp breath, and for a moment, time seemed to hold still. Then she spoke the words that would echo through the empire. "He has the genes of strength." The hall erupted into chaos. Voices shouted, some in disbelief, others in anger. Warriors who had trained their whole lives shouted at the insult. Counselors argued, demanding it be retested. But the right was clear. Once the princess declared, it could not be undone. Daniel stood frozen, unable to speak. He wanted to deny it, to explain he was not who they thought he was. He was no savior, no hero. He was just a man who had learned how to make broken things work again. Yet the princess looked at him with certainty, her gaze never wavering. "This is impossible," one alien lord barked, his voice sharp. "A human is nothing but a weak shadow among warriors. He will break in the first trial." Lysera turned to face him. "You see only the surface. I see deeper. I see endurance, I see heart, I see the strength that does not fall when the body does. He is the one." Her words carried power. They silenced the chamber, even if they did not win agreement. The guards approached Daniel and led him away from the hall, though many eyes still burned with anger. He walked in a daze, his thoughts spinning. How could this be happening? Why had she chosen him? He wanted to return to his tools, his workshop, the quiet life he knew. But that life was already gone. In the chambers that followed, Daniel sat alone, staring at his hands. He remembered his childhood, fixing old machines with his father, who always said, "Strength isn't just about lifting. It's about never giving up when something seems broken." He thought of how many times he had failed and how many times he had simply tried again. Maybe that was all he had, and maybe that was what the princess had seen. Lysera entered quietly, her presence filling the room. She did not speak right away, only studying him as if confirming what she already knew. At last, she said, "You doubt yourself." Daniel gave a weak laugh. "Of course I do. I don't belong here. I don't know how to fight like they do. I'm not a warrior. You are more," she said simply. "You are what my people need. They think strength is only power and skill. But I know it is something else. I saw it in you." He met her eyes, searching for any trace of mistake, but found none. Her belief was unshaken, and strangely it steadied him. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Lysira said, "you prepare. The trials will be hard. The galaxy will not accept you easily. But if you carry the strength I saw, you will endure." Her words lingered in the air, heavy and certain. Daniel felt the weight of what lay ahead, but also a spark he had never known before. For the first time, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, his father had been right. That true strength was not in being the strongest, but in never breaking no matter how much the world pressed down. And as the sun set beyond the crystal halls of the Ziyari Empire, Daniel Carter, the human mechanic who had never sought glory, found himself chosen as the one hope against the darkness rising in the stars. Daniel Carter woke the next morning in a chamber that felt more like a prison than a room. The walls were carved from polished stone, lined with alien designs he could not read. A single window looked out to the glowing spires of the Zayari capital, but he hardly cared for the view. His mind was heavy with doubt. He replayed the scene from the hall over and over again. The princess had touched his chest and claimed he had the genes of strength. The words still rang in his ears, but he wondered if she had been wrong, or if something inside him had tricked her gift. When the guards came, their expressions were hard. They did not respect him. To them, he was a mistake, a joke brought into the most sacred of rituals. They led him to the training grounds, a wide arena filled with weapons, machines, and strange creatures used for practice. Already alien tutors waited for him, their eyes sharp and unfriendly. Among them were a tall reptilian warrior with scales shining like armor, an insectoid tactician whose many eyes watched everything, and a healer wrapped in shimmering robes, holding vials of liquid light. "You are the human," the reptilian said, his voice rough like grinding stone, "chosen by accident. But the princess commands that we train you. If you break, it will not be our fault." Daniel swallowed hard but said nothing. He was used to people underestimating him. On Earth, he had been seen as nothing more than a mechanic, someone who fixed what others broke. He had always been in the background, never at the center. He thought of the grease-stained clothes he used to wear, the sound of engines humming after his repairs, the quiet satisfaction of keeping things alive. He clung to those memories because here in this place everything felt foreign. The insectoid tactician clicked its mandibles. "We will see if you are worth even the breath you waste." The first lessons were brutal. He was given a plasma staff far too heavy for his hands. The reptilian struck at him with blows meant to crush, not teach. Daniel tried to block, his arms shaking, but the staff was knocked from his grasp again and again. Each failure echoed in the jeers of watching soldiers. He stumbled, rolled in the dirt, and tasted blood where the weapon had grazed him. His muscles burned with pain he had never known. Yet every time he fell, he forced himself back up. His body screamed, but something deep inside whispered to stand again. The healer watched silently. After each session, Daniel's wounds were mended by strange nanites that stitched flesh and soothed bone. But the pain of failure could not be erased. It sank into him, heavy and sharp. Lying on the cold stone floor at night, Daniel wondered if he should give up, tell the princess she was wrong. But then he remembered her eyes, steady and unshaken, when she said, "You are the one." That memory alone kept him from walking away. Days stretched into weeks. Training became harder. He learned the art of movement, how to dodge instead of block, how to use his smaller frame to slip between strikes. The reptilian still mocked him, but his blows began to meet resistance. The plasma staff no longer felt like dead weight, but an extension of his arms. The insectoid drilled him in strategy, presenting endless battle scenarios on glowing holomaps. Daniel struggled to think like a soldier, but he found patterns where others did not. He began to see the flow of systems, weaknesses in design, and solutions that surprised even his tutor. "You think like an engineer," the insectoid hissed once, "but perhaps that has value." It was the first time any of them had given him the slightest credit. Daniel carried that small moment with pride. Still, there were nights when doubt consumed him. Alone in his chamber, he would stare at his hands and whisper to himself, "I am not a warrior. I don't belong here." He longed for the smell of oil and the sound of engines, for the simple work that had once given him peace. But then he thought of the galaxy outside, of the swarm that threatened to devour everything, and of the princess who had placed her trust in him when no one else would. He clenched his fists and promised himself not to break. Princess Lysera visited often. She never trained him directly, but she watched, always silent, her eyes following his every move. Sometimes she spoke to him after the others had gone. "You doubt yourself," she said one evening as he sat, bruised and exhausted, on the edge of the training ground. "I don't belong here," he admitted. "I'm not strong like them. I don't have their power, their skill. I'm just ordinary." Her expression softened, but her voice was firm. "Strength is not only in the body, Daniel. I chose you because I saw something deeper. You rise when others fall. You endure when others surrender. That is what the genes of strength mean. It is not written only in muscle or speed. It is written in the spirit." Her words lingered in his heart long after she left. For the first time, Daniel began to believe that maybe she was right. The trials grew harsher. He was placed in combat against mechanical beasts built to mimic the swarm soldiers. Their claws were fast, their jaws deadly. The first time, Daniel was thrown across the arena, barely escaping with his life. The second time, he lasted longer. By the fifth time, he was striking with precision, his movements guided not by anger but by determination. Sweat poured down his face and his arms ached, but he kept fighting until the last machine collapsed in sparks. The tutors no longer laughed. The guards who once called him weak now watched in silence, their scorn turning slowly to respect. Daniel was still far from a master, but he was no longer a joke. One night, as the moons of Zayar shone high, Daniel sat with Lysera in the palace gardens. The air smelled of strange flowers that glowed softly in the dark. For once, the weight of training was not on his shoulders. She asked him about Earth, about the skies and oceans he had left behind. He spoke of the rust-colored sunsets, the sound of waves crashing on forgotten shores, and the smell of rain on old stone streets. She listened with quiet wonder, as if hearing a story from a dream. "You miss your home," she said softly. "Every day," Daniel replied. "But maybe this is where I'm needed now." Lysera smiled faintly. "You are needed, Daniel, more than you know." Her words warmed him, and for the first time since his arrival, he felt not like a stranger, but like someone who might belong. When the next day came, Daniel rose before the sun. He stood in the arena, staff in hand, ready to face whatever would come. His body still ached, his doubts still whispered, but beneath it all, something stronger had begun to grow. A fire that no amount of failure could extinguish. And though he did not yet know it, that fire would be the very thing that carried him through the trials ahead, and one day, into the heart of battle itself. Daniel Carter had begun to change. Weeks of training had turned into months, and though his body was still human and not as powerful as the alien warriors around him, something in the way he carried himself had grown stronger. His tutors, who once scorned him, now found themselves pausing to watch him train. His movements, once clumsy, now showed a strange grace. He still stumbled and failed, but each failure was met not with surrender, but with determination. That, more than anything, was what began to earn him respect. In the arena, the palace guards who had once mocked him now whispered among themselves. They had seen him fight against mechanical beasts and survive. They had seen him return day after day, bruised but unbroken. He was not the strongest, not the fastest, but he was relentless. There was a quiet power in that relentlessness, one that no one could ignore. One morning, Daniel faced 3 warriors at once. They came at him with plasma blades, their strikes fast and merciless. At first, he barely kept up, dodging and blocking as best he could. Sweat poured down his face, his breath heavy. His arms shook from the effort. But then something inside him shifted. He stopped fighting to match their strength and began to fight in his own way. He used their size against them, slipping between strikes, forcing them to stumble into each other. He fought with patience, with precision, like a mechanic repairing a broken engine one part at a time. By the end, though exhausted, he stood as the last one on his feet. The reptilian tutor who had once called him weak gave a slow nod. "You endure," he said simply. It was the closest thing to praise Daniel had ever received from him, but even with progress, doubt still lived in Daniel's heart. At night, he lay awake in his chamber, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he truly belonged here. He was not born to fight. He was not raised for war. His world had been small, filled with engines and machines, not armies and empires. And yet, every time the doubt threatened to break him, he thought of Lysera. He remembered the certainty in her eyes, the way she had spoken with unwavering belief. He has the genes of strength. That memory carried him through the darkest nights. Princess Lysera herself had begun to spend more time with him. She would come to the training grounds to watch, her silver hair catching the light of the suns. She spoke little while others were around, but in private she encouraged him. "You fight not with anger, but with heart," she told him once. "That is why you will succeed." Her presence gave him strength. Sometimes he wondered if she truly believed in him, or if she simply hoped he would become what her people needed. Either way, her belief gave him something to hold on to. As the months went on, Daniel was introduced to the trial simulations. These were not simple sparring sessions or training fights. They were recreations of past battles from the Empire's history. Battles so terrible that they had scarred entire worlds. The simulations placed him in the heart of those wars, facing monstrous constructs designed to test his mind as much as his body. The first time he entered, he found himself surrounded by towering creatures of shadow. Their forms twisted and cruel. Panic gripped him, but he forced himself to move, to fight, to survive. He failed that first time, cut down by claws of smoke and fire. But when the simulation ended and he gasped for air, he demanded to try again. Each time he entered, he lasted longer. He learned to see patterns in the chaos, to adapt, to outthink his enemies. His mechanic's mind, trained to understand systems, found ways to turn the simulations to his favor. He discovered traps hidden in the environment, used fallen weapons against enemies, and created strategies that surprised even the tacticians who watched. Slowly, he began to win. The alien tutors no longer mocked him. Some even began to show respect. The insectoid tactician, once cruel, now clicked its mandibles in approval. "You are learning," it said. "Not as a soldier learns, but as one who sees the whole machine. This will serve you." Daniel felt pride for the first time, though it was mixed with fear. If he was truly becoming what they expected, then the weight of the galaxy's hopes would rest on his shoulders. He had not asked for this. He had never wanted it. But it was happening all the same. Outside the palace, whispers spread among the people. Stories of the human chosen by the princess reached every corner of the empire. Some laughed, calling it a mistake. Others began to believe. Farmers spoke of his endurance, soldiers of his courage, children of his strange, stubborn spirit. Without meaning to, Daniel was becoming a symbol. One evening, as the sun set and the sky glowed red and gold, Daniel walked through the gardens with Lysera. The air was quiet, filled only with the sound of water flowing through crystal fountains. Lysera looked at him thoughtfully. "You have changed," she said. "When I first touched your heart, I knew you carried the strength of endurance. But now I see it growing brighter." Daniel shook his head. "I don't feel strong. Every day I feel like I'm barely surviving." She smiled faintly. "That is strength. To endure when all else says you cannot. To rise when everything pushes you down. That is what I saw in you, Daniel. That is what will save us." Her words touched something deep inside him. He did not know if he was ready to save anyone, but he could not deny that he was no longer the man he had been when he first arrived. Something inside him was changing. He was beginning to believe in himself, even if only a little. The next day, he faced a simulation that tested him like never before. It recreated a battle against the swarm, the very enemy that threatened the galaxy now. Endless creatures poured from the shadows, their bodies sharp and alien, their eyes glowing with hunger. Daniel fought until his arms felt like fire, until his legs could barely hold him. He fell more than once, but each time he pushed himself back up, fighting on with desperate determination. At last, when the swarm collapsed into smoke and the simulation ended, Daniel stood gasping, his staff still in his hand. The chamber was silent. The tutors watched him with wide eyes. Even the reptilian, who had never praised anyone lightly, spoke. "You are not the same as when you came." Perhaps the princess was right. Daniel wiped the sweat from his face, his chest heaving. He looked at Lysera, who stood at the edge of the chamber. Her eyes glowed softly, filled with pride. And for the first time, Daniel felt not just like he was surviving, but like he was becoming what she believed he could be. That night, as he lay in his chamber, Daniel thought of Earth. He thought of his father's words. Strength is not in being unbroken, but in rising after every fall. He finally understood. He was not a warrior like the others. He was something different. And maybe, just maybe, that was what made him the one who could stand where others had failed. Unseen beyond the palace walls, the galaxy grew darker. The swarm was moving, devouring worlds in its path. Soon the trials would no longer be simulations. Soon Daniel would have to face the real enemy. But for now he rested, his heart steady, his spirit unbroken. He was ready to rise again when the time came. The day the swarm arrived, the sky itself seemed to shatter. From the void beyond the stars, the Zaith Dominion poured forth like a tide of black fire. Their ships blotted out the suns, endless and merciless. Worlds had fallen before them, and now their eyes turned toward the Zayari Empire. The people trembled, the council panicked, and the soldiers braced for war. And in the center of it all stood Daniel Carter, the human mechanic who had been chosen as champion against all expectations. He watched the fleets advance from the command deck of the palace citadel. Massive displays showed wave after wave of enemy ships breaking through defenses, tearing apart the outer colonies. The Empire's armies were vast, but they faltered under the swarm's relentless hunger. Daniel could see it in the eyes of the generals around him. They did not believe they could win. Princess Lysera stood by his side, calm but firm. "This is the moment," she whispered to him. "This is why you were chosen." Daniel felt the weight of those words pressing on his chest. He was not a general. He was not a soldier. He was still the man who once fixed broken engines on Earth, trying to stretch the life of old machines with tools and hope. Yet here he was, expected to lead against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The generals resisted at first. "He is untested," one snarled. "A human unworthy of command. He will lead us to ruin." But Lysera silenced them. "He sees what you do not. He fights not with pride, but with understanding. He will lead because he must." And so Daniel stepped forward. He studied the maps, the fleet formations, the endless tide of enemies pressing in. To the others it was chaos, but to him it was a broken system. He searched for the weak points, the flaws in the swarm's relentless march. Slowly a plan began to take shape in his mind. "Pull back the main fleet," he said quietly. The room erupted in shouts of protest, but he continued. "Draw them toward the celestial rift. The terrain there is unstable, full of broken moons and asteroid fields. Their swarm will press forward without thinking. We use that against them. We make their numbers work against them." The generals argued, but Lysera placed her hand on the table. "We follow him." Her word was final, and so the orders were given. The Zayari fleets retreated, a move that looked like weakness but was in fact bait. The swarm followed, hungering for blood, believing they had broken their enemy's will. But as they entered the rift, chaos turned against them. The swarm ships smashed into asteroids, collided with each other in the tight corridors of rock, and became easy prey for ambushes. Daniel stood at the command screens, directing fleets not like a soldier, but like a mechanic fixing a broken machine piece by piece. He turned the Empire's scattered forces into one great tool, and with it they struck back. For the first time, the swarm faltered. The soldiers cheered as enemy ships burst into fire, their endless tide slowed by the clever traps Daniel had laid. Hope, fragile but real, spread through the ranks, but victory did not come easily. The swarm pressed harder, forcing battle after battle. Daniel fought not only from the command deck, but on the ground as well. He refused to lead from safety. He stood among soldiers, plasma blade in hand, fighting side by side with them. His presence gave them courage. They saw a human who bled as they bled, who stumbled and rose again, who never asked them to do what he would not do himself. Slowly, their doubts faded. They no longer saw him as an outsider, but as their champion. One battle nearly broke him. At the edge of the rift, the swarm poured through in greater numbers than ever before. The Empire's forces were nearly crushed. Ships burned, soldiers fell, and the tide seemed unstoppable. Daniel fought with everything he had, but exhaustion weighed heavy on him. His arms ached, his vision blurred. For a moment, he thought it was the end. But then he remembered his father's words whispered from long ago. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about never staying broken." With a roar, he pushed himself back to his feet, rallying the soldiers around him. "Stand with me," he shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We don't stop here." The soldiers rallied. With Daniel at their front, they pushed back against the swarm, holding the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The battle was not a perfect victory, but it was not defeat. It was survival. And sometimes survival was enough. Word spread across the empire, tales of the human who fought like no other carried to every world. Children spoke his name, soldiers drew strength from his example, and even the nobles who had mocked him began to bow in respect. Daniel Carter had become more than a man. He had become a symbol. Yet the war was far from over. Reports came that the Swarm Queen herself was advancing. She was no ordinary leader, but a monstrous creature of immense power, said to control the hive with her will alone. Wherever she went, worlds burned. If she reached the capital, it would be the end. Daniel knew what that meant. He would have to face her. The thought filled him with fear, but also resolve. He had not asked for this role, but it was his now. He would not turn away. One night, as the fires of battle burned in the distance, Daniel stood with Lysser on the palace balcony. The air smelled of smoke and ash. The sky glowed with the light of war. She looked at him, her eyes steady, her voice soft. "You carry the weight of the galaxy, Daniel. And yet you do not falter. Do you know why?" He shook his head. "Because I have no choice?" She smiled faintly. "No, because it is who you are. When I touched your heart, I saw it. You do not fight for glory or power. You fight because you cannot bear to let others fall. That is the strength my people need." Her words stayed with him as he returned to the warfront. Each battle tested him. Each moment pushed him closer to his limits. Yet each time he endured. He fought with the spirit of someone who refused to surrender no matter the odds. And with every victory, however small, he brought hope to a galaxy that had nearly lost it. But the greatest trial still lay ahead. The Swarm Queen was coming, and Daniel knew that all his endurance, all his strength, all his will would be tested in that final clash. He did not know if he would survive. He did not know if victory was even possible. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not stop fighting. Not now. Not ever. And as the swarm spread its shadow across the stars, Daniel Carter stood ready, the human who carried the genes of strength, prepared to face the darkness head-on. The skies above Zaire Prime burned with fire as the swarm descended. Black ships poured across the horizon like a storm without end. The once bright towers of the capital shook as explosions thundered in the distance. People fled through the streets, their voices rising in fear. Soldiers rushed to their stations, knowing this was not just another battle. This was the final stand. The Swarm Queen herself had come, and with her arrival, the fate of the Empire would be decided. Daniel Carter stood at the gates of the Citadel, his plasma-forged blade in hand. His armor bore scratches and dents from countless fights, but his eyes were steady. He had fought through simulations. He had survived endless battles, but now he faced the greatest trial of all. Around him, soldiers looked to him with hope, their faith no longer shaken. He was not the outsider anymore. He was their leader, their champion, the one chosen by the princess. They whispered his name like a prayer, holding fast because he stood with them. Princess Lysera walked to his side. Her silver hair glimmered faintly in the firelight, her expression calm though her heart was heavy. She looked at him and said softly, "You do not have to fight her alone." Daniel shook his head. "If she breaks through, there will be nothing left to protect. This ends with me. I have to face her." Lysera placed her hand on his arm. "You are not just fighting for us. You are fighting for yourself to prove what I already know. You carry the strength we all need." Her words settled in his chest like fire. He gave a small nod, then turned back to the battlefield. The ground shook as the queen appeared. She was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Her body towered above the ruins, her limbs sharp and terrible, her eyes glowing with venomous light. Her voice was a hiss that echoed across the battlefield. "You dare stand before me, human? You are nothing but fragile flesh. You will break like all the rest." Daniel tightened his grip on his blade. His voice was steady, though his body trembled. "Maybe I will. But I won't stop until you fall." The queen charged, her claws slashing down with the force of thunder. Daniel leapt aside, the ground splitting where he had stood. He struck at her leg, his blade cutting into her armor. But it was like striking a mountain. Sparks flew, and the queen roared in anger. She swung again, and Daniel was thrown back, rolling across the dirt. Pain shot through his body, but he pushed himself up. He would not stay down. The battle raged. The queen struck with fury, her blows shaking the earth. Daniel dodged, blocked, and countered, though each move left him weaker. His arms ached, his lungs burned, and his body screamed for rest. But each time he fell, he forced himself to rise again. The soldiers watching from the walls gasped at his courage, shouting his name, drawing strength from his refusal to give up. Lysera stood at the citadel's edge, her heart pounding as she watched. She wanted to rush forward to help him, but she knew this was his fight. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Rise again, Daniel. Show her who you are." The queen's tail lashed out, striking Daniel across the chest. His armor cracked and he crashed to the ground, blood staining the dirt. The queen loomed over him, her voice filled with cruel triumph. "You see, human? You are nothing. You cannot win." Daniel coughed, forcing himself to his knees. His father's words echoed in his mind. Strength is not about never breaking, but about never staying broken. He raised his blade again, his voice hoarse but steady. "I'm not nothing. I'm human. And humans don't quit." With a sudden surge of will, he charged. The queen struck down, but he turned her own force against her, dodging at the last second and driving his blade into the joint of her massive claw. She screamed, thrashing wildly. Daniel held on, climbing up her arm, striking again and again, each blow fueled not by rage but by determination. He reached her head where her glowing eyes burned with fury. The queen struck again, her venom dripping, but Daniel twisted aside. In a final desperate move, he drove her own venomous spike back into her throat. The poison spread quickly, her body convulsing as her roar split the sky. With one last shriek, the queen collapsed, her enormous form crashing into the ground with earth-shaking force. For a moment, silence filled the battlefield. The swarm froze, their movements faltering without the queen's will to guide them. Then, as if a chain had been broken, they scattered, retreating into the void from which they had come. The Empire was saved. Daniel stumbled back, his body weak, his blade falling from his hand. He dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. Around him, the soldiers erupted into cheers. They rushed forward, lifting their voices in triumph. "Carter, Carter, Carter!" they shouted, the name of the human who had done what no one else could. Lysera ran to him, kneeling at his side. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her smile was bright. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us all." Daniel shook his head faintly. "Not me. All of us. I just didn't stop." She touched his hand gently. "That is why you are our champion. That is why you are the one I chose." As the suns rose over the battered city, Daniel Carter stood with the people of the Zayari Empire. No longer just a mechanic from Earth, no longer the outsider who was mocked and doubted. He had become the symbol of endurance, the living proof that strength was not found in bloodline or power alone. It was found in the will to rise again, no matter how many times one had fallen. From that day forward, songs were sung of him. Children learned his story. The galaxy spoke his name with respect. Daniel Carter, the human with the genes of strength, the man who never gave up, who stood against the darkness and brought hope to the stars. And though he carried scars that would never fade, he also carried something far greater, the knowledge that even the smallest, most ordinary person could rise to become extraordinary when the world needed them most.